We trusted them. We welcomed them as brothers. We lowered our shields. We opened our docks. We believed in loyalty. We were wrong.
What if the most organized, most disciplined, most successful legion in the entire Imperium was completely unprepared for what hit them? The Ultramarines, Guilliman's sons, the poster boys of the Great Crusade. They had conquered more worlds than any other legion, built an empire of 500 worlds called Ultramar that actually worked. They were efficient, they were rational, they followed the rules, and they trusted their brothers. That trust would cost them everything. This is the story of Calth, a perfect world and a perfect empire, destroyed in a single day by the one thing the Ultramarines never saw coming: betrayal. Not from Xenos, not from heretics, but from their own brothers, the word bearers, Lorgar's sons, the legion they had once humiliated, the legion that had been waiting for revenge. On Calth, the sun itself would become a weapon. Tens of thousands of space marines would die, and the Ultramarines would learn a lesson that would haunt them for 10,000 years. Some wounds never heal. Some betrayals are so deep that even immortal warriors cannot forget. This is the Battle of Calth, where faith murdered reason, where brothers killed brothers, where a perfect empire burned. Ultramar, the perfect empire. To understand what was lost at Calth, you need to understand what Ultramar was, what Guilliman had built. Because unlike most of his brother Primarchs, Roboute Guilliman did not just conquer worlds, he perfected them. The 500 worlds of Ultramar. That was Guilliman's empire. Not just conquered territory, not occupied planets trembling under Astartes' rule, but a functioning civilization. Roads that connected every settlement, laws that actually made sense, governments that served the people instead of just extracting tribute. It was the Imperium as it was supposed to be: efficient, rational, just. The Ultramarines did not simply bring compliance, they brought order. They studied each world they conquered, analyzed its culture, understood its needs, then integrated it into Ultramar according to logical principles. Guilliman treated empire building like a science, because to him, it was. And at the heart of Ultramar sat Calth. Not the capital, that honor belonged to Macraga, Guilliman's homeworld. But Calth was perhaps more important. It was the logistics hub, the armory world, the fleet anchorage where Ultramarines ships resupplied between campaigns. Thousands of vessels could dock in Calth's orbital facilities simultaneously. Weapons forges ran day and night. Supply depots stretched for kilometers underground. If Macraga was Ultramar's heart, Calth was its beating pulse. The world itself was beautiful. Hive cities rose in ordered spires. Agricultural zones produced surplus food. The people were prosperous, educated, loyal. They did not fear the Ultramarines. They respected them. Because Guilliman's sons did not rule through terror, they ruled through competence. Calth had a son, Veridian, a stable star that had burned for billions of years and would burn for billions more. Its light was golden, warm. Under that sun, Calth thrived. Gardens grew in the habitation levels. Children played in parks between the manufactorums. Life on Calth was good, safe, predictable. The Ultramarines had made it so. Through planning, through discipline, through the application of reason and the theoretical principles of governance that Guilliman laid out in his writings. Everything had a place. Everything had a purpose. There was no chaos on Calth. Only order. That was their strength. And it would become their greatest weakness. Because the Ultramarines, for all their tactical brilliance, for all their strategic genius, they had never prepared for the one scenario their Primarch could not predict through logic. They had never imagined that one of their brother legions would lie to their faces and then try to murder them all. The Ultramarines believed in the Great Crusade. They believed in the Imperium. They believed that Space Marines were brothers in arms, united in purpose, serving the Emperor's vision of a unified humanity. They believed fundamentally that loyalty meant something. They were wrong. Lorgar and the Word-Bearers, brothers in faith. To understand why the word-bearers betrayed Calth, you have to go back to before the Horus Heresy, back to when Lorgar, Primarch of the 17th Legion, still worshipped the Emperor as a god. Lorgar was always different. While other Primarchs conquered worlds through force, Lorgar conquered them through faith. He did not just bring compliance, he brought conversion. Every world the word-bearers took, they built temples, cathedrals, shrines to the God Emperor of mankind. They preached, they converted, they turned conquests into pilgrimages. The problem was that the Emperor did not want to be worshipped. He had spent centuries building the imperial truth, the secular rational ideology that declared there were no gods, no supernatural powers, only science and reason and the march of human progress. Religion was a poison. Superstition was weakness. Faith was the enemy of enlightenment. But Lorgar would not listen, could not listen, because to him, the Emperor was divine, a being of such power, such vision, such perfection, that worship was the only rational response. How could you look at the Emperor and not see a god? How could you witness his works and not fall to your knees? So, Lorgar kept building temples, kept preaching, kept spreading the faith, and the Emperor grew angrier, because Lorgar's obsession was slowing down the Great Crusade. While other legions conquered dozens of worlds, the word-bearers took years on a single planet, building, preaching, converting. Finally, the Emperor decided to make an example. He ordered Guilliman and the Ultramarines to travel to Monarchia, the perfect city, the word-bearer's crown jewel, a city of pure faith, where every building was a temple, where millions worshipped the Emperor every day, and the Emperor ordered it destroyed. Guilliman complied, because Guilliman always followed orders, always did what the Emperor commanded, because the Emperor's commands were theoretically sound and practically necessary. The Ultramarines' fleet arrived at Monarchia. They forced the entire Word-Bearers Legion to kneel in the ashes of their city, and then the Emperor himself arrived to deliver his judgment. Lorgar wept. His sons wept. They had built Monarchia out of love, out of devotion, and it had been burned, rejected, humiliated. The Emperor told Lorgar to stop worshipping him, told him that gods did not exist, told him to embrace the imperial truth and abandon faith. Then the Emperor left. Guilliman left. Indeed, the Ultramarines left. And Lorgar was alone in the ashes of his perfect city, with nothing left but humiliation and rage. That was when everything changed. Lorgar's first chaplain, Erebus, whispered a different truth. If the Emperor would not accept worship, perhaps there were other gods who would. Gods who wanted faith, who craved devotion, who would reward their followers instead of punishing them. Lorgar listened, and he went on a pilgrimage, not across the Imperium, but into the Eye of Terror, into the warp itself, seeking the divine, and he found it. The Chaos gods welcomed him. Khorne, Tzeentch, Nurgle, Slaanesh. They showed Lorgar that gods were real, that faith had power, that worship was not weakness, but strength. And they promised him that if he served them, they would give him everything the Emperor had denied him. Revenge, vindication, the chance to prove that faith was the truth all along. Lorgar returned from the Eye of Terror, a changed being. His legion returned changed. They no longer worshipped the Emperor, they worshipped chaos, the ruinous powers, the true gods. And they began to spread a new faith, quietly, carefully, through the warrior lodges, through whispered sermons, through corruption that spread like a virus through the Imperium's veins. When Horus turned traitor, Lorgar was already waiting, already prepared, already corrupt. The Word-Bearers were the first legion to fall to chaos, even if the War Master himself did not know it yet. And when Horus asked Lorgar what he could do to help the rebellion, Lorgar smiled, because he knew exactly what he wanted. He wanted Guilliman. He wanted the Ultramarines. He wanted revenge for Monarchia. And he knew exactly where to find them. Calth. The Gathering Storm, Horus's plan. By the time the Battle of Calth began, the Horus Heresy was already well underway. Istvan III had seen the first betrayal when loyalist Astartes were virus-bombed by their own Primarchs. Istvan V had seen the drop site massacre, where 7 legions turned on 3 and nearly destroyed them completely. But Terra remained untouched. The Emperor still sat upon his throne. The Imperial Palace still stood. And if Horus wanted to win this war, he needed to reach Terra before the Imperium could gather its strength. The problem was Guilliman. The Ultramarines were the largest legion, over 250,000 Astartes strong. They controlled 500 worlds. They had resources, fleets, manufacturing capability that dwarfed almost any other legion. If Guilliman brought his full strength to Terra to defend the Emperor, the traitors would lose. Simple mathematics. The Ultramarines alone could match 3 or 4 traitor legions. Add in the other loyalists, and Horus's rebellion would drown in bodies. So, Horus needed Guilliman distracted, delayed, kept as far away from Terra as possible while the War Master made his push for the throne. Lorgar volunteered for the task, eagerly, because this was not just strategy for him, this was personal. The Word-Bearers had been humiliated by the Ultramarines. Lorgar had been forced to kneel in the ashes of Monarchia while Guilliman watched. The debt had not been paid, the insult had not been answered. Until now, Horus approved the plan. The Word-Bearers would travel to Ultramar. They would engage Guilliman, tie down his forces, keep the 13th Legion busy while Horus struck at Terra. It was logical, practical, all strategically sound. What Horus did not know was how far Lorgar intended to go, how deep the Word-Bearers' corruption had spread, how much Lorgar was willing to sacrifice for revenge. The Word-Bearers' fleet arrived at Calth under false pretenses. They sent word ahead, claimed they were mustering for a joint campaign into the Eastern Fringe. Lorgar personally requested that Guilliman gather the Ultramarines' fleet at Calth for coordinated operations. Brother helping brother. Loyal Astartes working together to expand the Imperium. Guilliman believed them. Why would he not? The Word-Bearers were his brothers. They had fought together during the Great Crusade. Yes, there had been tension after Monarchia. Yes, Lorgar had been distant. But they were still loyal, still servants of the Emperor, in still Space Marines. The Ultramarines prepared Calth to receive the Word-Bearers' fleet. They cleared docking berths, prepared supply depots, organized logistics for 2 legions operating together. It was what they did best: efficiency, planning, making the theoretical practical. They scattered their fleet across Calth's orbital space, some ships in dock for resupply, others on patrol routes, others ferrying troops and equipment between the surface and orbit. Standard fleet operations. No need for battle formation. No need for void shields at maximum. They were among brothers. Lorgar's fleet arrived. Hundreds of ships, thousands of Word-Bearers, and they took up positions exactly where the Ultramarines directed them. Guilliman met with Lorgar in person, discussed the upcoming campaign, reviewed strategic objectives, made plans. The 2 Primarchs talked like brothers, like allies, like warriors united in purpose. And the entire time, Lorgar was smiling, because the trap was already set. Word-Bearers' infiltration teams were already planetside, already moving through Calth's defenses, already sabotaging weapons platforms, already corrupting Vox networks, already positioning themselves to strike. Guilliman noticed something was wrong. He was too intelligent not to. Small things, inconsistencies in the Word-Bearers' deployment, strange energy signatures from their ships, the way Lorgar's sons moved with too much purpose, too much coordination. But by the time Guilliman's instinct screamed danger, it was already too late. The Word-Bearers had come to Calth for one reason: not to muster, not to campaign, but to kill, to burn. To make the Ultramarines pay for Monarchia in blood and ash and betrayal, and they were about to succeed. The perfect trap. The Word-Bearers had spent months planning the attack on Calth. Every detail, every contingency, every possible Ultramarines response. Because unlike the Ultramarines, who prepared for honorable battle, the Word-Bearers prepared for murder. Cor Ferron, Lorgar's second-in-command, oversaw the operation. He was the architect of treachery, a mortal who had been enhanced to near Astartes level through dark augmentation and chaos gifts. He hated Guilliman almost as much as Lorgar did, perhaps more, because Cor Ferron understood that the Ultramarines represented everything the Word-Bearers had rejected: reason over faith, logic over devotion, order over passion. The Word-Bearers' fleet had positioned itself perfectly, They held orbital supremacy without the Ultramarines even realizing it. While the 13th Legion ships were scattered across dozens of docking berths and patrol routes, the word-bearers maintained tight formation. Battle ready, weapons armed, void shields already cycling to full power. Planetside, infiltration teams moved through Calth's infrastructure like ghosts. These were not normal word-bearers. These were the corrupted, the changed, Astartes who had embraced chaos so completely that reality bent around them. They wore the armor of the 17th Legion, but underneath the ceramite, something else writhed. They sabotaged weapon platforms, deleted firing solutions from the cogitators, corrupted ammunition feeds. One by one, Calth's orbital defenses were quietly disabled, not destroyed. That would have raised alarms, just altered, made unreliable, and turned into weapons that would fire on their own masters when the moment came. The Vox networks were compromised. Channels that should have connected Ultramarines' command posts instead routed through word-bearers' relays. Messages were intercepted, orders were delayed, communications that should have taken seconds would take minutes, and in battle, minutes meant death. Landing pads were marked, not obviously, just small corrupted runes carved into the rock reed, invisible to Imperial sensors, visible to those who knew how to look, teleportation coordinates for demonic incursion. Because the word-bearers were not coming alone. They were bringing guests, entities from the warp that hungered for Ultramarines' souls. Guilliman felt it, that wrongness. He stood in Calth's command center reviewing deployment plans with his captains. And something in the back of his mind screamed danger. The Primarch's instincts, honed by centuries of warfare, told him that something was fundamentally wrong with this situation. He checked the fleet disposition, reviewed word-bearers' positioning, analyzed their movements, and the theoretical calculations did not add up. The word-bearers were deployed too aggressively, too ready, as if they expected combat. But there was no enemy here, just brothers. Guilliman called for defensive formation, ordered Ultramarines' ships to raise void shields, told his ground commanders to place troops on alert. He could not explain why, could not point to specific evidence, just a feeling, an instinct. His captains obeyed, because Guilliman's theoretical assessments were never wrong. If the Primarch sensed danger, they would prepare for it. But it was already too late. The word-bearers had timed their attack perfectly. Guilliman's orders went out over the compromised Vox network. Instead of reaching all Ultramarines units simultaneously, they trickled out one at a time. Some ships received the order immediately. Others would not receive it for several more minutes. And in those minutes, the word-bearers struck. Cor Pharaon gave the order, a single word transmitted across encrypted word-bearers' channels, a word in the dark tongue of Colchis, the language of Lorgar's corrupted home world, illuminate, and the betrayal began. Betrayal, the sun dies. The word-bearers' fleet opened fire without warning, no declaration, no challenge, no chance for negotiation or explanation. Just sudden, overwhelming violence. Lance batteries that had been powering up for the last 10 minutes discharged at point-blank range. Macro cannons fired, torpedoes launched. The word-bearers unleashed every weapon they had against the scattered Ultramarines' fleet. Ships died before they could respond. Ultramarines' vessels still in dock. Their void shields lowered for resupply operations, exploded as lance strikes punched through their hulls. Reactor cores went critical. Plasma drives detonated. Thousands of Astartes died in the first 30 seconds, vaporized in the fury of their brothers' guns. The Ultramarines' ships that had raised their shields survived the initial volley, but they were scattered, disorganized, out of formation. The word-bearers had positioned themselves to enfilade the entire Ultramarines' anchorage. Every direction the 13th Legion turned, they faced enemy guns. Ultramarines' captains screamed orders, tried to organize a response, tried to understand what was happening. Because this could not be real. The word-bearers were their brothers. This had to be a mistake, a misunderstanding, a terrible accident. It was no accident. On the surface of Calth, Cor Pharaon stood in a commandeered weapons platform, one of Calth's massive orbital defense cannons, a weapon designed to destroy battleships in high orbit, powerful enough to crack a moon. He had reprogrammed it, changed its target. Instead of aiming into the void to defend Calth, the cannon now aimed at the system's star, at Veridian, not the sun that had burned peacefully for billions of years. Cor Pharaon gave another order, and the weapon fired. The munitions were not conventional. They were archaeotech, Dark Age weapons that the word-bearers had recovered from the Eye of Terror, things that should not exist. Technology so dangerous that the Mechanicum had forbidden its use, warheads that could ignite a star. They streaked across the void at relativistic speed, crossed the distance between Calth and Veridian in minutes, and struck the star's surface. At first, nothing happened. The star continued to burn. Golden light continued to bathe Calth. The sun that had nurtured this world for eons seemed unchanged. Then the star began to die. It was not a natural death, not the slow decline of a star running out of fuel over billions of years. This was murder. The archaeotech warheads had destabilized Veridian's core, triggered a cascade reaction, forced fusion processes that should not occur. The star was tearing itself apart from within. Veridian flared, brightness spiked, the golden light turned white, then blue, then a terrible searing ultraviolet that burned the eyes of anyone looking directly at it. On Calth's surface, people looked up, saw the sun changing, did not understand. Some thought it was beautiful, a celestial event, an aurora. They called to their children to come see the pretty lights in the sky. The Ultramarines knew better. Their sensors screamed warnings, radiation levels spiking, solar output increasing exponentially, stellar detonation imminent. The sun was going to explode, and when it did, Calth's surface would burn, the atmosphere would ignite. Everything exposed to the star's light would be incinerated. Guilliman understood immediately, saw the theoretical conclusion of Veridian's death, calculated the time to stellar detonation. Approximately 14 minutes until the first shockwave. 30 minutes until the surface became completely uninhabitable. He started screaming orders. Evacuation. Get everyone underground. Get everyone into the arcologies. The deep structures beneath Calth's surface. The bunkers and tunnels and sealed compartments that could survive anything. But 30 minutes was not enough time. Not nearly enough. Calth had a population of millions. The Ultramarines had hundreds of thousands of troops on the surface. They could not all reach shelter. The word-bearers knew this. That was the point. The entire attack was designed to maximize casualties. It killed the Ultramarines' fleet in orbit, kill the Ultramarines on the surface, burn Calth to ash, leave Guilliman with nothing but corpses and rubble. In orbit, the naval battle raged. Ultramarines' ships fought back desperately, tried to disengage, tried to form a defensive line. But the word-bearers had surprise, had positioning, had overwhelming advantage. And on the surface, Veridian continued to brighten, continued to swell, continued its death throes. The people of Calth ran for their lives. Toward the arcology entrances, toward the underground shelters, crushing each other in their panic. Parents carried children. The elderly were left behind. It was chaos. Pure, uncontrolled chaos. The Ultramarines tried to maintain order, directed civilians to safety, carried the wounded. Baum established defensive perimeters around the arcology entrances to prevent stampedes. But then the word-bearers landed. Drop pods slammed into Calth's surface like meteors. Assault rams breached the walls of hive cities. Thunderhawks disgorged squads of traitors into the streets. The word-bearers were not here to occupy Calth. They were here to kill, to butcher, to enact Lorgar's revenge in the most visceral way possible. And leading them were the Gal Vorbak, the Blessed Sons. Word-bearers who had traveled into the Eye of Terror and returned changed, possessed. No longer fully Astartes, no longer fully mortal. Something in between. Something daemon. They were nightmares made flesh. Their armor had fused with their skin. Horns erupted from their helms. Claws replaced gauntlets. They moved wrong. And spoke in voices that came from multiple throats at once. And when they killed with more than just blades and bolters. They killed with the warp itself. The Gal Vorbak tore into Ultramarines and civilians alike, slaughtering without distinction. without mercy. This was not war, this was ritual murder, because the word-bearers had not just betrayed the Ultramarines, they had sacrificed them. Every death fueled chaos. Every drop of blood spilled was an offering to the dark gods. Calth burned. The sun died. Brothers killed brothers in the streets, and Guilliman, for perhaps the first time in his life, felt something he had never felt before: helplessness. The first hours, slaughter in the streets. The Ultramarines had never fought an enemy like this. They had conquered orcs, defeated Eldar, exterminated countless Xenos species across 1,000 worlds. They were the most successful legion in the Imperium, masters of warfare in all its forms. But they had never fought chaos. They had never faced an enemy that did not follow the rules of reality, that did not die when it should, that killed with madness as much as with weapons. The Gal Vorbak moved through Calth streets like a plague. Individual Ultramarines could not stop them. Squads could not stop them. Even veteran sergeants with centuries of experience fell before these demon-possessed abominations. A Gal Vorbak warrior took a dozen bolter rounds to the chest and kept coming. Its armor was fused to demonic flesh. The wounds healed almost as fast as they were inflicted. It grabbed an Ultramarine sergeant with claws that burned with warp fire and tore him in half. Ceramite armor meant nothing. Enhanced physiology meant nothing. The demon simply unmade reality around the Astartes, and he ceased to exist in any meaningful way. The Ultramarines learned quickly: volume of fire, do not engage in melee, hit them with plasma, with melta, with heavy weapons that could vaporize the possessed entirely instead of just wounding them. It worked, sometimes, but for every Gal Vorbak killed, 3 more Ultramarines died. And all the while, Veridian continued its death spiral. The star's light had become blinding. Ultramarines who looked directly at the sky had their eye lenses burned out. Civilians who remained on the surface for more than a few minutes developed radiation burns. The atmosphere itself was heating. All breathing became difficult. The air tasted of ozone and ash. Remus Ventanus, captain of the Ultramarines' 4th Company, found himself leading a desperate fighting retreat toward one of the major arcology entrances. He had 200 Astartes with him, maybe 5,000 civilians. Word-bearers behind them, Gal Vorbak hunting them. And less than 10 minutes before the surface became lethal. His Vox crackled, interference from the dying star. He could hear other Ultramarines units calling for help, requesting support, reporting casualties. The communications network was chaos. He could not tell who was still alive, who had reached safety, who was still fighting. Then he heard a voice he recognized. Captain Arcus, 3rd Company, trapped on the other side of the city with his entire company. No path to shelter, no time to reach an arcology, and word-bearers closing in. Arcus did not ask for rescue. He knew there was no time. Instead, he asked Ventanus to remember them, to tell Guilliman that the 3rd Company stood loyal, that they fought to the end, that they never broke. Then the transmission ended, and Ventanus knew that 2,000 Ultramarines had just died. He pushed his own warriors harder, faster, ordered them to carry the wounded civilians, to shield the children with their own bodies if necessary. The Ultramarines were built to protect humanity, even if it meant dying to do it. They reached the arcology entrance with minutes to spare, a massive reinforced gate large enough to drive Baneblades through. It was still open, still accepting refugees, but the crush of bodies was overwhelming. Tens of thousands of people trying to force their way through a bottleneck. Ventanus established a perimeter, positioned his Astartes to hold the entrance, bought time for the civilians to evacuate, told his warriors that they would be the last ones through, that they would hold until everyone else was safe. The word-bearers hit them from 3 directions at once. Bolter fire filled the air. Ultramarines fell, but they did not break, did not retreat. Every second they held was another 100 civilians reaching safety. Above them, Veridian entered its final stage. The star pulsed, swelled. Its outer layers began to strip away. In orbit, both fleets pulled back. Even the word-bearers did not want to be caught in a stellar detonation. On the surface, the temperature spiked. Metal buildings began to melt. Rockreed cracked. As water in the streets flashed to steam, Ventanus ordered his warriors through the gate, pulled back 1 squad at a time, maintained fire discipline, professional, controlled. Even in the face of apocalypse, the Ultramarines remained Ultramarines. He was the last one through. Saw the word-bearers charging toward him, saw the Gal Vorbak reaching with clawed hands, saw the sky turning white. He triggered the arcology gate. 20 meters of reinforced adamantium slammed shut, sealed, locked, cut off the surface from the underground. Seconds later, Veridian detonated. The shockwave hit Calth like the fist of an angry god. The surface ignited, atmosphere burned. Every structure still standing was vaporized. Every living thing still exposed was incinerated. The word-bearers who had been caught outside died screaming. Even the Gal Vorbak could not survive a star-going supernova. Their demonic flesh burned, their armor melted. The warp entities possessing them were torn back into the immaterium. Deep underground, in the arcologies, the Ultramarines felt the impact. The ground shook. Power failed. Emergency lights flickered on, and for a moment, there was silence. Then someone spoke. A single word. Status. It was Guilliman's voice, transmitted across every intact Vox channel. The Primarch was alive. He was organizing. He was taking command. The Ultramarines responded, unit by unit, company by company, reporting their positions, their casualties, their status. The numbers were catastrophic. Tens of thousands dead in orbit, tens of thousands dead on the surface. Maybe half the Ultramarines' strength on Calth was gone. Just gone. What murdered by their own brothers. But half remained. And those survivors were angry. The Battle of Calth had just begun. And now it would be fought in the dark. Underground. In tunnels and arcologies and sealed bunkers where the dying star could not reach. The Ultramarines had lost the surface. But they still held the deep places, and they would make the word-bearers pay in blood for every meter of ground. The war would last years. It would be brutal, grinding, attrition warfare at its most savage, but the Ultramarines would not break because they were Guilliman's sons. And Guilliman had taught them that even in the face of betrayal, even when the theoretical became nightmare, even when brothers became enemies, they would stand, they would endure. Guilliman's fury, the Primarch strikes back. Guilliman had survived in the initial orbital strikes. His flagship, the Macraga's Honor, had been one of the few Ultramarines vessels with its void shields already raised when the word-bearers opened fire. The ship took damage, heavy damage, but it survived. Now Guilliman stood on the command deck, surrounded by damage reports and casualty lists, and felt something he had spent his entire life suppressing. Rage, not the hot, uncontrolled fury of Angron, not the righteous wrath of the lion. This was cold, calculated, a rage that was filtered through Guilliman's analytical mind and came out the other side as something far more dangerous. The word-bearers had betrayed them. Lorgar had looked Guilliman in the eye, had talked about brotherhood, about cooperation, about shared purpose, and it had all been lies, every word, every gesture, every plan. They had killed tens of thousands of his sons, murdered millions of Imperial citizens, destroyed Calth, turned a thriving world into a dead rock orbiting a dying star. And they had done it because Guilliman had followed the Emperor's orders at Monarchia, because Lorgar's feelings were hurt, because faith mattered more to the word-bearers than loyalty, than honor, than the future of humanity itself. Guilliman analyzed his rage, examined it theoretically, determined that it was justified, logical, appropriate. The word-bearers had violated every principle of brotherhood, every oath of loyalty. They deserved punishment, they deserved destruction, and Guilliman would personally see to it that they received both. But first, practical concerns. The Macraga's Honor was damaged but combat-capable. Several other Ultramarines ships had survived the initial attack and were rallying to the flagship. Maybe 20 capital ships, perhaps twice that in escorts and frigates. Not enough to win a straight fleet engagement against the word-bearers, but enough to hurt them. Guilliman issued orders, tactical, precise, no wasted words, no emotional outbursts, just pure strategic calculation. The surviving Ultramarines ships would form a defensive sphere around Calth, protect the planet, prevent the word-bearers from landing additional forces, contest orbital supremacy, make the traitors pay for every advantage. Simultaneously, Guilliman began coordinating the ground war. Vox communications were still compromised, still routing through word-bearers' interference. So, Guilliman established runners, physical messengers, and the Ultramarines moving through the arcology tunnels carrying written orders. It was slow, inefficient, but it could not be intercepted. He organized the defenders, assigned sectors, established supply lines, set up triage stations for the wounded, turned the chaotic evacuation into an organized defense, because that was what Guilliman did. He brought order to chaos, structure to confusion, purpose to panic. Word-bearers' forces had landed in the arcologies, thousands of them, maybe tens of thousands. They were hunting through the underground cities, killing Ultramarines, killing civilians, performing their dark rituals, trying to corrupt Calth from within. Guilliman would not allow it. He began moving through the arcologies personally, leading counterattacks. When his sons saw their Primarch fighting in the tunnels beside them, bleeding with them, killing word-bearers with his own hands, they fought harder. Guilliman was a sight to behold in combat. Not as aggressive as Angron, not as brutal as Russ, but efficient, perfectly efficient. Every movement was optimized, every strike calculated, no wasted motion, no unnecessary risk. He fought with the hand of Dominion, his power fist, crushing word-bearers into paste, with the arbitrator, his bolter, placing shots with perfect accuracy. He did not roar, did not rage, just killed, methodically, professionally. The theoretical had become the practical, and the practical conclusion was that the word-bearers needed to die. But Guilliman wanted more than just to kill word-bearers. He wanted Corpharon, Lorgar's second, the architect of this betrayal, the one who had fired on Veridian, who had murdered his sons. Guilliman analyzed the word-bearers' deployment patterns, predicted where Corpharon would position himself. The traitor would want to be close to the action, close enough to witness his victory, but not so close that he risked dying before he could savor it. Guilliman calculated the most likely locations, cross-referenced them with word-bearers' activity, narrowed it down to 3 possible command posts. Then he went hunting. He took a kill team. Veterans, the best warriors 4th Company had left. They moved through the arcologies like ghosts, silent, efficient, professional. They found word-bearers' positions, bypassed them, avoided engagement unless necessary. This was not about killing every traitor. This was about killing one traitor in particular. The 3rd location was correct. That Guilliman's theoretical had proven accurate, as it always did. Corpharon had established a command post in one of Calth's geothermal processing stations, deep underground, powered by the planet's internal heat, independent from the surface, a perfect position to coordinate the word-bearers' assault. Guilliman did not hesitate, did not announce himself, just attacked. His kill team breached the chamber, bolters firing, melta-guns vaporizing word-bearers' guards. They cleared the outer defenses in seconds, and there, in the center of the chamber, stood Corpharon, not in Terminator armor, not surrounded by bodyguards, just standing there, waiting. He had known Guilliman would come, had prepared for it, had wanted it, because Corpharon served chaos, and chaos wanted Guilliman corrupted, wanted the perfect Primarch to fall, and wanted to prove that even Robout Guilliman, master of logic and reason, could be broken. Corpharon smiled and lifted his hand. The hand glowed with warp energy, dark power stolen from the chaos gods, power that should not exist in reality, power that could kill a Primarch. He struck. The blast hit Guilliman directly, warp energy tearing at his very soul, pain beyond anything physical, the daemons of chaos clawing at his essence, trying to corrupt him, trying to turn him. Guilliman fell to his knees, felt the darkness pressing against his mind, felt chaos whispering, promising power, promising revenge, promising that if he just gave in, just accepted the truth of the gods, he could have everything. And Robout Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines, Lord of Ultramar, master of the theoretical and practical, or said one word, no, because Guilliman did not believe in gods, did not believe in chaos. did not believe that faith had any power except the power people gave it through their own weakness. He believed in reason, in logic, in the strength of the human mind to overcome any obstacle through analysis and will. And he stood. The warp energy broke against his will like waves against a cliff. Chaos could not corrupt what would not be corrupted, could not break what refused to break. Guilliman advanced on Cor Farron, step by step. The traitor struck again and again, pouring all his dark power into trying to kill the Primarch. It was not enough. Guilliman reached Cor Farron, grabbed him by the throat with the hand of dominion, lifted him off the ground. For a moment, he considered killing the traitor, crushing his throat, ending him. It would be easy, a justified, satisfying. But then Guilliman made a different choice, a theoretical choice that served a practical purpose. He let Cor Farron live, not out of mercy, but because a living Cor Farron could carry a message, could tell Lorgar what had happened, could inform the word-bearers that their perfect trap had failed, that Guilliman was still alive, still fighting, still coming for them. Guilliman threw Cor Farron against the wall, ordered his warriors to take the traitor prisoner. Then he returned to coordinating Calth's defense. Because there was work to do, a battle to win, brothers to avenge, and Roboute Guilliman always finished what he started. The Underground War, Years of Darkness. Calth's surface was dead. The star Veridian had stabilized somewhat, no longer in full supernova, but it was broken, unstable. It emitted lethal radiation constantly. The atmosphere was gone. The temperature fluctuated between extremes that would kill unprotected humans in seconds. Nothing lived on the surface. Nothing could. Calth had become a tomb world. But beneath the surface, in the arcologies and tunnels and deep underground cities, the war continued. It would continue for years. The word-bearers could not leave. Guilliman's surviving fleet, reinforced by ships arriving from other Ultramar worlds, contested the orbital space. Any word-bearer's vessel trying to extract ground forces would be destroyed, so the traitors remained, trapped on Calth, forced to continue fighting in the dark. The Ultramarines could not leave either. And this was their world, their people. And more than that, every word-bearer they killed here was one that could not reach Terra, could not help Horus, could not spread chaos. So they stayed and fought, day after day, week after week, month after month. It was not glorious combat, not the kind of warfare the Ultramarines had trained for. This was attrition, grinding, savage close quarters fighting in tunnels barely wide enough for power armor. Every meter of ground contested, every intersection a battlefield, every room a potential tomb. The word-bearers used sorcery, summoned demons, corrupted the very structure of the arcologies with warp energy. Rooms that should not exist appeared overnight. Hallways twisted into impossible geometries. The rational architecture of Calth warped into nightmare. The Ultramarines adapted. Ol learned to fight chaos on its own terms, not with faith, but with discipline, with cold logic, with the refusal to accept that reality could be anything other than what their senses told them. When they encountered impossible rooms, they mapped them, analyzed them, found the patterns. Because even chaos followed patterns. Even the warp obeyed certain rules, and once you understood the rules, you could counter them. Ultramarines, librarians, psychers who had been trained to use their abilities for the Emperor became critical. They could sense warp corruption, could identify demon incursions before they manifested, could fight sorcery with controlled psychic power. Remus Ventanus distinguished himself, led his fourth company through dozens of engagements, developed tactics for fighting in the cramped arcology tunnels. Yet these wrote field manuals on anti-demon warfare, became one of Guilliman's most trusted captains. But the casualties mounted, slowly, steadily. Both sides losing warriors they could not replace. Both sides running low on ammunition, on supplies, on hope. The Ultramarines controlled the majority of the arcologies, had more defenders, more resources, more support from the remaining civilian population. But the word-bearers had chaos, had sorcery, had the ability to summon reinforcements from the warp itself. Stalemate, bloody, unending. Guilliman managed the war like he managed everything, theoretically, practically. He established supply chains, rationed ammunition, organized civilian labor to manufacture basic weapons in the arcology factories, turned Calth's remaining industrial capacity toward the war effort. He also wrote. During the rare moments of quiet, he wrote his theoretical conclusions about what had happened, about why the Horus Heresy occurred, about the flaws in the Space Marine Legion structure that allowed such massive betrayal. He was writing what would eventually become the Codex Astartes, the book that would reshape the entire Imperium's military structure after the heresy ended. But that was theoretical. For now, the practical was survival. The war reached a turning point when Wordbearer's reinforcements tried to break through the orbital blockade. Lorgar himself led the attempt, brought the Wordbearer's flagship and a battle fleet. Guilliman met them in orbit, the Macraga's honor against the Fidelitas Lex, Primarch against Primarch. The naval battle was brutal. Ships on both sides were destroyed, but Guilliman had one advantage. He was fighting to protect. Lorgar was fighting to retrieve a failed invasion, and protection was easier than conquest. The Wordbearer's fleet was driven off. Lorgar escaped. Cor Pharaon escaped with him, but they left behind thousands of Wordbearers still fighting in Calth's depths. Those traitors were doomed. They knew it, fought anyway, because they served chaos. And chaos did not allow retreat. Guilliman systematically hunted them down, sector by sector, level by level. The Ultramarines showed no mercy. This was not war. This was extermination. It took 3 years. 3 years of fighting in the dark. 3 years of killing brothers who had become monsters. 3 years of watching Calth die slowly from within. When the last Wordbearer fell, when the last demon was banished, when the arcologies were finally secure, Guilliman stood in the ruins and took stock. Calth was free, but at what cost? Tens of thousands of Ultramarines dead, millions of civilians dead, a world destroyed, a star murdered, and for what? Revenge. Lorgar's petty revenge for a humiliation decades ago. Guilliman looked at the casualty reports, analyzed the strategic situation, and came to a theoretical conclusion. The Wordbearers had failed to delay him. Yes, the battle had taken years. Yes, it had cost him dearly. But Horus's plan to keep the Ultramarines away from Terra had ultimately not worked, because while Lorgar was trapped at Calth, Guilliman had been organizing Ultramar, calling in his forces from across 500 worlds, building an army that would march on Terra and crush the traitors. Calth had been a tragedy, but it had also been a mistake, and Lorgar had wasted years on revenge when he should have been supporting Horus. And that mistake would cost the traitors everything. Guilliman swore an oath. On the ashes of Calth, on the bones of his fallen sons, on the memory of the perfect world that had died, he would reach Terra. He would save the Emperor, and he would make Lorgar pay, not with rage, not with passion, but with cold, logical, inevitable vengeance, the practical kind. Aftermath, the scar that never healed. The Battle of Calth ended, but Calth itself never recovered. 10,000 years later, in the 41st millennium, Calth remains a dead world. The surface is still lethal. The star Veridian still emits dangerous radiation. Nothing grows, nothing lives. The planet is a graveyard, but deep underground, in the arcologies, Ultramarines still stand guard. Descendants of the survivors, successors to the Fourth Company. They maintain the tunnels, preserve the monuments, remember the fallen. Because some scars never heal, some wounds never close, and some betrayals echo across millennia. Guilliman himself was forever changed by Calth. Before the betrayal, he believed in the Great Crusade, believed that Space Marines were brothers, believed that loyalty and reason were sufficient to build an empire. After Calth, he believed differently. He realized that loyalty could be corrupted, that brothers could become enemies. That reason alone was not enough when facing an enemy that rejected reason entirely. The Codex Astartes was born from Calth's ashes. Guilliman's theoretical analysis of what went wrong, his practical solution to prevent it from happening again. He broke the legions, split them into chapters of 1,000 warriors, made it so that no single commander could ever wield the power that Horus had wielded. No single betrayal could ever compromise such massive forces. Some of his brothers hated him for it, called it distrust, called it weakness, called it the breaking of brotherhood. But Guilliman did not care, because he had watched his perfect empire burn, had watched his sons die, had watched brothers become monsters, and he would not allow it to happen again. The Ultramarines who survived Calth were changed too. They had learned that the galaxy was darker than they believed, that faith could corrupt, that chaos was real, that demons existed. They had learned it the hard way, through blood and betrayal and years of war and darkness. When Guilliman was mortally wounded 10,000 years later, when he was placed in stasis at the moment of death, Calth remembered. The survivors told stories to their successors, told them about the day the sun died, about the word-bearer's betrayal, about Guilliman's fury. And when Guilliman was resurrected in the 41st millennium, when Robout Guilliman walked again as the Lord Regent of the Imperium, one of his first acts was to visit Calth. He stood in the arcologies, looked at the memorials, read the names of the fallen, tens of thousands of names, and carved into stone, preserved for eternity. And he wept, because Calth represented everything he had tried to build and everything that had been taken from him. A perfect world, a functioning empire, a dream of what humanity could become, all destroyed by faith, by belief in gods that fed on suffering, by brothers who valued their wounded pride more than the future of their species. Guilliman made a new oath at Calth, not vengeance. Vengeance was already paid. Lorgar had been humiliated during the heresy. The word-bearers had been driven into the eye of terror. Their victory at Calth had ultimately meant nothing. No, Guilliman's new oath was simpler. He would rebuild, he would restore, he would take the shattered Imperium and make it function again. Not perfectly, he was no longer naive enough to believe in perfection, but functional, practical, capable of survival, because that was what Calth had taught him. The theoretical must serve the practical. Dreams must give way to reality. And sometimes, survival is the only victory that matters. The Ultramarines still fight in Calth's depths, still stand guard over the dead world, still remember the betrayal, because some lessons are too important to forget. Some scars must be preserved as warnings. Some stories must be told and retold so that future generations understand the cost of trust betrayed. Calth is a monument to loyalty, to sacrifice, to the price of brotherhood broken, and it will stand forever. A dead world circling a dying star, a reminder that even perfect empires can burn. Even the best of us can be betrayed. Even trust can be weaponized. The Battle of Calth was not the largest battle of the Horus Heresy. That honor belongs to Terra. It was not the most strategically significant. That would be Istvan V, where 3 loyalist legions were nearly destroyed. But Calth was perhaps the most personal, the most cruel, the most emblematic of what the heresy truly was. It was not just a civil war, not just a rebellion against the Emperor. It was the murder of brotherhood itself, the weaponization of trust, the corruption of everything the Great Crusade had claimed to represent. Lorgar did not attack Calth for strategic gain. He attacked it for revenge, for wounded pride, because Monarchia had burned and his feelings had been hurt. And in pursuing that revenge, he destroyed a world, killed tens of thousands of his brothers, doomed millions of innocent people, all for the satisfaction of making Guilliman suffer. That was chaos, not power, not strength, but pettiness elevated to apocalyptic scale, human weakness amplified by inhuman gods. Guilliman learned from Calth, learned that reason alone could not defeat faith, that logic alone could not counter belief, that sometimes the enemy does not care about winning, they only care about making you lose. The survivors learned too, learned to fight in the dark, learned to stand when hope was gone, learned that even when the sun dies and brothers betray and the perfect world burns, you can still choose to stand, to endure, to remember. 10,000 years later, Calth still burns. The underground war is over. The word-bearers are gone, but the Ultramarines remain, standing guard, keeping watch, preserving the memory. Because that is what Guilliman's sons do. They endure, they remember, they stand, even in the face of betrayal, even when trust becomes a weapon, even when the sun dies, they stand. And they will stand forever, in the darkness beneath a dead world, beneath a dying star, a monument to loyalty that could not be broken, to brotherhood that survived even after it was murdered. Some scars never heal. Some lessons are too important to forget. Calth remembers. The Ultramarines remember. And the galaxy will never forget the day the sun died and brothers became enemies and a perfect empire learned that nothing, not even perfection, is safe from betrayal.